Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I hope you had a great new year. We're taking a look at Batman White Knight. So this was a 8-part series by Sean Murphy, Matt Hollingsworth, and this was a DC Black Label book, and I want to say kind of came out from nowhere. You know, one of the questions I have, I'd just love to kind of get an answer to this, is did DC think that they were getting a major book on their hands? Like, what did they think they were getting when they commissioned this? Sean Murphy is a known talent, is a very kind of known name, and so obviously I think they assumed the book was going to sell fairly well. But I have a feeling that DC didn't know what they were going to get. And I say that because the marketing of this book was a little bit like late to the party. It came out, they promoted it, then it went quiet, as if it's like, well, now that it's out, we can move on. And then the sales, well, you'll see the chart here, but the sales came in and were strong for the subsequent issues. And then it's like the marketing department kind of raced back into the picture around like issue 4, and they're like, hey, yeah, this is a big deal. We'll promote this anyway. Batman White Knight presents a couple interesting pieces of the picture, and so I'm anxious to go through it with you. I'm going to show you a couple different slices of information. As always, as I do these, I'm continuously refining kind of things I want to show and parts of the story that I want to tell. And it all is leading. It's like we're building the financial cinematic universe, if you will, because all these things are going to start to play. What you're going to see in the future is a lot more comparisons between, the issue I'm talking about and then past issues, as you start to get an overall picture of the industry. Should help. It always tells a number of different stories. Anyway, as we were saying, so Batman White Knight was a bit of it felt like a bit of a surprise. So it launches in October 2017, and it basically runs for 8 issues. From what I understand in talking with Sean Murphy in the past, is that it was not like they weren't commissioning the sequel or any of this stuff. This was very likely or very well could have been a one and done series, but it did perform well. So how well was that? Well, we're going to take a look at this chart right here, where we go from issue 1 to issue 8. And just for reference, what I'm going to do, this is officially, you see the numbers there on the side, 0 to 100,000 copies. We're going to go ahead and change this chart to give us a really clear picture of what's going on. We'll get rid of everything under 60,000. Now you see a much clearer picture. This makes the drop between issue 1 and issue 2 look a lot more dramatic than it actually is, because the first issue of this starts at 86,791. It then proceeds to dip to just under 70,000. It goes to 69,668. There's a huge caveat, by the way, in all this that I'll get to in a minute, and that really has to do with reprints. So this is really just kind of the initial go of the series. So then issue 3 does the unthinkable. And this is where it goes from 69,000 to 72,000. And then issue 4 goes to 73,000. And issue 5 goes to 77,000. So what do you see here in these issues 2 through 5? Well, we're almost a 10,000 copy increase of the series. Now, I can't stress enough how unusual this is. When I say unusual, I mean it does not happen. I mean, if that story has not been clear from all the videos I've done, this isn't normal, especially for a big 2 comic. Stuff like Saga has steadily increased, but this is within the course of basically 4 issues, number 2 to number 5. And when you do count in reprints, well, first of all, reprints makes the entire curve look very, very different. But for now, we're just going here. So it goes up to 77,000. Now, what's important to notice, just keep this in the back of your mind, is that retailers are about 3 months behind. There's final order cutoff, which puts them less than that. But you basically see retailers doing a big course correction. They sold out basically of issue number 1. They didn't expect to, and that's where you see issue number 3 bounce up a little bit higher. Issue number 2 was ordered before retailers knew what was happening with issue number 1. Issue number 3 comes out, and that's where they're able to utilize final order cutoff and get a couple more issues there, and then the strength of the series just keeps growing. So issue 6 dips from 77 down to 75, and then issue 7 goes to 73, and then issue 8 goes back up slightly, about another 500 copies to issue 8. What we see here is a relatively steady Basically a steady picture between issue number 3 and issue number 8, 72,679 to 73,616. So basically 1,000 copies roughly, with a little bit of a spike in the middle there as they introduce, more around kind of Harley Quinn and some other things. She had been introduced earlier in the series, but they were doing some revelations about kind of just different pieces in the story, spiked some of the interest. In terms of the back issue market, perhaps unsurprisingly, issue 5 and to some extent issue 6, really issue 5 is probably the easiest one to get your hands on to a large extent. Issue 1 and 2 and 3 are really hard to get your hands on, certainly for a relatively cheap price. But what this does is it gives us a trend from issue 1 to issue 8 that is a 6% trend decrease from issue 1 to issue 8. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting. So 6%, first of all, is a smashing success. That's if you looked at all the other videos I've done, this is not how it typically goes. Saga obviously had a different picture, and another series we're going to talk about in a minute had a different picture. But 6% trend decrease from issue 1 to issue 8. But as we've been doing with everything else, if you ignore the issue number 1 bump, which undoubtedly this series did. It's a new Batman series. It's Sean Murphy. A lot of people were higher on issue 1. They immediately cut their orders. If you do a trend from issue 2 to issue 8, we flip it, and suddenly we see a 5% trend increase. And this right here, this single picture right here, is why we're seeing additional White Knight series, why we're seeing strength in the line. And this tells a very clear message, which is people saw it, they liked it, they invited their friends, they sold more. That's what all the publishers want to see happen. This is the picture they want. 5% trend increase is really nice. So where does this take us? Well, okay, so let me compare for just a moment. So let me go back and bring in issue number 1, and I'll show you why. You might be going, 6% trend decrease. I mean, it's still a decrease. Again, comics in general atrophy, but to put this in context, what I want to show is some other comics that were launching around early 2018 when this series was going on, and show you what that looks like. So if we take it back to issue 1, we're at that 6% trend decrease. Okay, let's bring in Superman. The highly publicized Brian Michael Bendis comes in, obviously sells a lot higher out the gate. It's selling close to 140,000. But we've seen the Superman video here on this channel. You know where this is going. From its first 8 issues, so we're comparing as much apples to apples. Now, yes, of course, Superman is an ongoing series. White Knight is not. But as you will also see from videos I've already put up and other ones, limited series events tend to drop faster. Batman White Knight is an abnormality. How much of an abnormality you're going to see in a moment. But basically, Superman carries with it a 62% trend decrease. 62%. Okay, that puts that 6% of White Knight in some context there. Now, obviously, Superman number 1 also had the big bump, but if you look at that decline, it kept dropping, whereas White Knight bent the curve up. And now let's throw in something from another company. Let's go ahead and throw in the X-Men. So here's Uncanny X-Men, also launched about this time, a little bit later, about almost 1 year later. It launches. Its first 8 issues has a 70% trend decrease. Obviously, it's number 1 sold higher. That tends to be the Marvel way. And that's a brutal, that's a video in itself where we talk about the different relaunches of X-Men. But to go for, just under 180,000 down to 60 from issue 1 to issue 2 is horrendous. But you're seeing this line not stabilize. You're seeing it decrease from issue 2 above 60,000 down to issue 8, which is now hovering below 50. That's basically what's happening there. So if we compare the 3, and again, this is just meant to kind of show you some examples of things. We're going to look at a more apples to apples comparison in a moment, but around the same time period, because some of you have been asking, hey, how much of this is based on just the time period the comic came out in? This is all in that, late 2017 through 2018 kind of area of comics. What we see is White Knight has 6% trend decrease, Superman 62, and Uncanny X-Men 70. So pretty interesting comparison, and it's also worth noting that both X-Men and Superman had dramatically more marketing and advertising going into it. We got months of Bendis is coming. We got full-page ads run in Entertainment Weekly about how this was the best comic in the century and all the rest. X-Men was the return to force of the X-Men. Now, obviously, this is the relaunch before the Hickman relaunch, because we are trying to keep it within the same year. And this obviously turned out to be a bit of a bust, but all the same, it's interesting to look at the picture this way. So now I want to flip it up a little bit to give you something a little bit more comparable, because let's take a look at Civil War and Civil War II, of which there are videos up. You can see them on the channel and you can go through them. But why this is an interesting comparison. Okay, so first off, Batman White Knight, issue 1 to issue 8, 6% trend decrease, like we've been saying. Civil War, 7 issues, 5% trend increase. This is a series that increased its numbers. Civil War II had a 41% decrease over its lifespan. But here's the interesting part. When we take out that number 1 issue, White Knight gives us that 5% trend increase we talked about before. Civil War drops to a 1% trend increase from issue 2 to issue 7. And Civil War II continues a 38% trend decrease. By the way, why this is so brutal and why this second issue is so interesting is because first issues always tend to pop sales. But what we see is it definitely did pop the sales of Batman White Knight, but not in an unhealthy way. A swing from a 6% trend decrease to a 5% trend increase, it's 11% total swing for a number 1 issue. That's not bad. That's really, it lost some people, but it picked them up very quickly and started gaining after issue 2. That's a good thing. Civil War, on the other hand, it definitely had some big moments, but it held its audience very well. And Civil War is kind of the benchmark. Well, we'll get to it in a second, but Civil War really is the last time we saw a series do what White Knight did. Now, at a different scale, and to be fair and truthful, we'll look at that too. But Civil War II, even when you take out that number 1 issue, it still is decreasing 38%. That's brutal. I can't begin to tell you how brutal that is for a series. And it's interesting to do the math this way. Now, here's where we have to be fair. So Batman White Knight, it's averaged, over the course of its line, it averages 75,000 copies sold per issue. Civil War is at a different scale. It's at 267, and even Civil War II, with all of its decrease, is still at 163. So, to be fair, Marvel's Civil War and Civil War II sold way more issues. Of course, it's an event comic, a lot more marketing and everything else. But, you know, if you're doing these kinds of comparisons, it is worth noting that the scale of the comics being sold certainly were much higher on the Civil War and Civil War II. But the trend, and that's kind of the key here, the trend is Batman White Knight had a audience retention that looked a lot more like Civil War than any series between Civil War and White Knight. And in fact, that gets us to disclaimers. First off, as I mentioned before, reorders for this series were high, and there's missing data for the reprints. What I can tell you is that when you add in what numbers you do have for the reprints, and the reason I didn't include them in this graph is there's just not data available for 2 of the issues, which skews it pretty badly. What you see is very similar to kind of what you've seen in a couple other places, like Immortal Hulk in particular, where the reorders, the reprints on issue 2 were extremely high. And my theory, because I'm missing, I think, issue 3 and I'm missing issue 5 on reprints, my theory is that what I can tell is that when you add in the reprints, the whole White Knight line gets very, very flat. And in this case, it's flat as a good thing. You see a lot of pickup of interest. When retailers underordered on issue 2, you saw that get picked up with reprints, and you saw a much more static line. Here's the other data point. Digital orders were high. Again, how high? It's a secret. We don't know exactly how high. However, what we've heard is it exceeded the average being around 8%. I've heard numbers of 12 to 15%, again, anecdotally. But here's the other odd part, is that White Knight was sold as individual issues, which is normal. It's sold as a trade, and it's sold as collective copies. You can actually find White Knight in multiple different categories on Comixology. It's a little bit weird how White Knight has been sold, but based on the ranking, it looks like those 3 strategies are paying off, and that's probably one of the reasons why digital does better for White Knight than others. Then there's been multiple versions of the trade. We're going to look at that in a second. That will debut. It debuted fairly high. It debuted at number 1, and it held its sales pretty good. But in general, this is the last limited series that had a trend that looked like this, and maybe I'm going to uncover something else. But I've looked, I think, now at all the events, Marvel and DC, and the big limited series, the ones that were promoted, And the last time you saw a trend go up like this was for Civil War. So that puts White Knight in some pretty damn good territory. It's comics don't do this, and so it's especially for the big two. Now, definitely some of the indies have this slow growth. You saw that with Saga, but you don't see that recovery over the course of 8 issues. It's very unusual. But let's take a look at trades real quick. So with trades, it sold, the very first volume of this, and there have been multiple volumes of White Knight sold. There's been versions that are sold through the direct market. There's been, I think, special versions sold at places like Barnes & Noble. There's definitely some special versions sold at Amazon. A bunch of different ways this has been done. Anyway, through the Diamond direct market in October of 2018, it launches with 12,065 copies of the trade. And basically, in the next month, then the trades, and this is, again, typical and not terribly alarming. It goes from 12,000 down to just under 3. And it basically hovers kind of around there. I suspect, as I pull the numbers, the 5th month, which would have been February of 2019, and April 2019 are weirdly low. So I don't know exactly what went on there. I suspect, again, some missing data. It happens from time to time. Generally, this picture is pretty flat, steady decline over 18 months, which is not unusual. So when you get to finally 18 months out, which is March of 2020, we're down to 642 copies sold. But what's unique here is that if on average, if you look at trade paperback sales through Diamond, very few of them last past 8 to 10 months at most. 18 months later, and this is March, is of course when the pandemic kicked in, and then DC started moving away from Diamond, and the numbers have become impossible to get. To be 18 months out of initial launch and still bringing in sales is pretty damn impressive. Debuting at number 1 and holding sales for 18 months is weird. Now, what exceeds this? Well, you saw Saga a bit before, and Walking Dead. Those two are beasts where trade paperback sales are concerned. But as near as I can tell, and I've looked at things like certainly Ms. Marvel and Squirrel Girl and Batman and regular ongoing Batman and other things, and the trade paperback sales are, fit this model and a little bit lower. Again, most tire out and leave the picture around the 10-month period. So the fact that this was still bringing in sales, in fact, in the 11th month, it was, up close to where it was at number 2. This is, again, an unusual picture, and it's a happy picture. If you're DC, this is good news. This is basically a property you continue to invest in. And then the last piece is Amazon. So again, using that book calculator that I talked about in the video where I compared a lot of the YA and what's selling over at Amazon, as near as we can tell, and you plug in the numbers, White Knight is currently selling about 350 copies per month. Now, 1 year ago, it was selling around 1,800 copies per month. Now, here's the interesting bit. I think tracking Amazon numbers is a whole other kind of beast in general, but if you start to add that in, you then get to a picture where White Knight starts to look like one of the bigger graphic novel sales that certainly DC has had in the last 10 years, and consistently so. The fact that you've got multiple versions running on Amazon right now, and the original, the first one for the first series, is still clocking in around 350 copies per month, over 2 years from when it debuted, that's good. To give you a sense, the graphic novels overall at Amazon, including things like Saga, are down below that number. So that means a couple things. It means that White Knight is finding an audience outside of the regular direct market over at Amazon and other places. It is a bookseller that is clocking like Watchmen, like Infinity Gauntlet, like other things that typically are supported by movies. And I have no idea if any of this is going on or not, but if you're a Warner Media, you've got to think some kind of animated movie or some kind of Miles Morales into the Spider-Verse type thing for White Knight would be a solid idea based on the numbers you're seeing here. Seems like it would be, but anyway, who knows? But overall, White Knight, success story for DC. It's made some good money. It continued to put up good things, and I want to point this up here because it is an unusual story of gain, and especially gain over a relatively small amount of time, gain over 8 issues. So we have lots more coming up. I've got Captain Marvel. I've got new X-Men. I've got some of the others. You'll see some different curves and some different examples. And we're going to loop back, and we're really going to focus on some of the newer stuff. I'm going to take a look at Dawn of X since it's launched and kind of what it did, as well as some of the other series that, particularly what I'm interested in, and I hope you are too, are comics that launch and relaunch and relaunch and relaunch again. By the way, you might be asking, what happened to Batman White Knight 2 Curse of the White Knight? I will do that number as well. That one did not have the same curve as White Knight. It was more traditional, I would say, slope of how limited series go. But still, even there, the percentages nowhere near some of these others. I'm going to find some other things I can compare it to. Unfortunately, the comparisons, the ready-made comparisons, like sequels, like Civil War II, are terrible comparisons. Those are it doesn't feel right at all to compare them because they're very, very different animals in terms of what they do and how they've sold. But the numbers have held up. But anyway, good stuff. Congratulations to Sean Murphy. He's got a good, nice hit on his hands. And if you're sitting here wondering, like, hey, I wonder why is DC approving of another version of this, and why are they doing spin-offs like the Harley Quinn one and others? It's like, this is why. It's actually not much more simple than this. This is why. The numbers are solid. It's a reliable comic. It's a reliable comic in the sense that it does what they want comics to do, which is not what they normally do. So it's reliably good numbers, but unusual at the same time in a positive way. So anyway, hope that all made sense. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Like always, throw some comics you'd like me to see numbers on, like me to see me do numbers on, I should say, down in the comments below. I'm tracking all of them. I've got them all. When I see them on there, I'm just adding it to the list. Please, 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 if you're really hoping for like a 10-year retrospective on some comic, those are going to be done much later. I'm building to those. Like I said, we're building the evidence here. I've got spreadsheet after spreadsheet now of numbers, and we'll all get there in the end. But right now, runs, like just basic runs, are like, somebody asked for Daredevil. We'll definitely do Daredevil. We're not going to do Daredevil back from the 70s. I've done videos before on newsstand numbers and why those are so not dodgy, and it's near impossible to even give you a clear picture of what was going on there, other than numbers were higher. But we'll see where we can go. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and take care of yourselves.